sembe soche kine yomde la chase lo sanje chodang soge chonam la chanju pardo dane japsu che dagi jinso gibe sonam Rola Benjir Sanje Rubar Sho Sanje Chodon Soje Chonon Chanju Bardo Dane Gyatsu Je Dagi Junye Gib Sonam Gi Rola Benjir Sanje Rubar Sho Sanje Chodon Soje Chonon La Chanju Bardo Dane Gyatsu Je Dagi Jinso Gib Sonan Gi Rola Benjir Sanje Ruparasho Kangi Tuzenya Sona Dawa Tamja Bombe Tambe China Danjabe Kodam Dela Chaza Unit the Commission di Labshaga.
No,
the Seshe Chuyadus Sani Yagalaya Maranzu Sani Gonda Soya to the Yagal Sapasan Chagduas Manzude Tandas Sani Sapurede Yagal Sapasangi Chuzu Gabane Shoge Chuzu Gabane Gubapat Pasanda Pembanilia Thailand Burma Sri Lanka that last sob Neden de Zor Cube or Duzu Tavache and then do Tambanya Shagi and Sunjuch Gavam Nangduas, Chuzu Gabane, go for the Yagachu, call when I catch Mushuji dos, and Ting Aranse, Lobsanti, go Jamie, chair to Manzu Chuzu Chagaji, Japshi Gyabje, and Chuzu drew the Sani, Chuzu drew the Chagane, so choachis, Sani drew the Chagatella, Yagachu go Yudua.
So there is an announcement to make. So this is that. So tomorrow is Thursday, right? And then, so tomorrow night, Thursday night, will be Friday morning in India, and then so that morning in India, and also the next morning. So in other words, Thursday evening, Friday evening for us. His Holiness is going to be teaching for 1 hour in India, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., mainly to the followers of the Theravadin tradition, Thailand, Burma, and so forth. And what he's going to be teaching is the Sutra of the Satipatthana Sutra, so the Sutra on the close placement of mindfulness, which is something very important to study. So for that reason, I would like, I'm asking if we could start half an hour later tomorrow night and the night after at 6:30 p.m. instead of 6, because 6:30 is the same as 9 a.m. in India, and so it would mean that we can attend that teaching and also not interfere with our schedule here by changing it by half an hour, so that they don't overlap, in other words. No. No. So that's 2 days, right? Then after that, we'll do it the same as usual.
Yeah. Jojo Tenjun de go to Niebe, Yi Mimi the Inyamos, Kazan Gajaranja in das.
Okay, so we're looking at verse 3, which we already started looking at yesterday. So it's particularly this part where it says is and is not. No.
This one? Oh, that Digi zo Kartingersna, Maranse, Tatapatu, and chö tamji yugu delu ngone yutine yeba tabu otindis jeje yoba tabuji and zinda tindichi imbati and tenju juchanla tene tati and yurang dulu ngone tube tong bachi imba and ji imba ta hakoyagi soda yung dusne ta tujung tan bebe kone jibelamne and ta rashime tan beyagi tisungu yor ta kanda di zo joja karten gorsna tenjung tala tan rashime ba and tomar tan beyati sungu yor.
Now, what this is teaching, this verse, is that up until now, we have believed the objects to exist from their own side, through their own way of being, in a sense, in the way that they appear to. So they appear to exist that way, and then we believe in that appearance. And what this is talking about is using the fact of being dependent arising as a reason to prove, to establish that everything is empty of existing by way of its, by way of its own nature. And specifically, this is talking about the way in which we use reasoning in order to reach the understanding that comes out of the process of listening. In other words, what this is talking about is the way in which we first come to understand emptiness by using logical reasoning.
Sikji dilaya deni shubina namdar ribe topji sunrab ten jishin jela shinring minjobe kebe kamdu taye sunrabla ngomba mebe töba chebr shosne tambu töba chidang ribe lamne ani ma tenlam bebe ati ani susu gigenda mindane ani ba shung jojati kane kare otike pa nyenje and tembe chagors namdar beto bi sunrad jishinjela shinding minjobe kebe kamdu taye sunrabla ngomba mebe taba chaber shos ko tujung ten begi yodi di toneya tengidwa.
So this also shows something which actually Rinpoche mentioned, Lama Tsongkhapa mentions in his own writings. He talks about there's one particular verse that he composed where he expresses the
Tonda masa, tonda parsum the gave monomre.
Tonda basum. No. So this is actually the Tonda basum. So that's the prayer of the virtuous beginning, middle, and end. So there's one verse in that where you find the prayer to be like never satisfied, in a sense, in receiving teachings, listening to teachings in order to be able to gain a correct view of emptiness. So what this is talking about is the process of reasoning that we need to rely on in order to understand emptiness in the beginning, and the way to get that kind of insight is by listening to explanations of these great treatises from many teachers, from various teachers.
That ni tindegi that rangun trube tongbe tawa ten be that ribashi sun yundu and kant and tongjugi gaja tati ngösen de kechmu shitarabas gaja ngömas gaja ngebe nesne ne tamboti gaja ngebe ne sunguduas ta rangun madruba ten be yundu tigi and gaja karkagi yoraslamna tandang aran sogi shikanda kai ji ta nangsoli kar shardeba takara yedeba chigi yutine yeba tabuchigi nangshi tatartu shendeya 다 내가 있는 다 각자인 바래 가다 유 둘루 뭐네 야 여봐도 없지 말한 소리 링해오지 난데 내가라 엔 가제 난수인 바래 다 지다지나 들에다 가자 가르샤스나 가자 가야 가자 거 가르스나 규ген 칸라 떠봐 매봐 유경은에 추두경은에 여봤다 붙지 낭신 나왔다도 셴바다가 얘는 다 가자 난수이스 다 가자 데레스 뜨가고 요르스.
So this is talking about using reasoning to establish that nothing exists from its own side. So not existing from its own side. So we're talking about the what we call in Tibetan the gacha, the object to be negated, the thing that's being negated, that which is being refuted. And in fact, this is extremely important when you're trying to understand emptiness. And that's why when we look at the four essential points, which outlines the way to meditate on emptiness, the first one is the essential point of ascertaining the object of negation. So we have to get clear in our minds what it is that we're negating, what it is that we're saying doesn't exist, what's being refuted. And one way to explain that object of negation is it's exactly what appears to us all the time, because everything that appears to us appears to exist from its own side, from the side of the object. And that exactly is the object of negation. There's that very vivid appearance of everything, kind of like concrete appearance of everything existing from its own side. So in other words, everything appears very vividly or concretely to exist from its own side, from the side of the object, not depending upon any kind of cause and conditions, but completely independent of anything. That's exactly what the object of negation is.
다 가정문지 캡 람리 체면한 친딩나라 가정문지 캡 채워가야 가정문지 캡 충어가야 어딘데기 숨고도 왔어. 다 더줘야 술지 징내야 개청버렸어. 왜나 단단한지 지 시품받다 보이나 까왔다 보이나 간대질이야 독스만 지윤도 아니 그 유띵네 수도 중간에 까와지 여봤다 보지 나시 셴베 차대 랑원의 주바 진배 진주디 임바제 디까바라마도 지기 최진 군조파 까와디 까바 마르바스 디까송이 있는 최진 군조 대야 까송바 이메이나 아니 가정문제 캡쳐와 아니 차달 흉도야 땡중식의 동바강도야 디견디 여버치레스 다 랑원의 주베 차드 까바를 마도 지기 시체젠 까바 마르스 던전 유베 차드 까바 마르스
Now in Lama Tsongkhapa's great exposition of the stage of the path, Lamrim Chömo, he talks about the fault of negating too much, and he also talks about the fault of negating too little. So in other words, the object of negation, what you're negating is yes, too extensive or not extensive enough. So this is very good to look at. This is very good to understand. So for example, whatever object it might be, it could be a vase, it could be a pillar. So when it appears, how it appears is as if it exists from its own side. And we believe that appearance. So we've got the appearance of existing from its own side, and also the belief or grasping at it as existing from its own side. So that is what's being negated. The vase existing from its own side, the pillar existing from its own side. What's not being negated is the conventional existence of a vase or the conventional existence of a pillar. In other words, a conventionally existing vase is not being negated. And if you do negate even the conventionally existing vase, then that means that that your object of negation is too extensive. Is too what you've negated is too much, and in fact that would mean that you're being nihilistic, because you're actually negating even the conventional existence of the object, not just the existence of something from its own side. And it would mean that your analysis or your meditation is, in a sense, destroying the conventional phenomena, destroying dependent arising. So what you're not negating is the thing which actually exists there and is able to function. No.
Oh, that the massive batam. 동시 처제 디 춘이 습의 생활 마시버를 마도지 동시 처제 매버스고 말스 동시 처제 까버 말스 다 마시버 점 주체도 체네 다 춘이 디 생활이야 동시 처제디 아니 랑은 주바파 까윤도 동시 처제디야 마시버 임베 주체도 체네 어다 다 갈소래 여바마이 야베 디마식스 다 추니기 아니 시뱅올이야 동시 최전도 시금이도 왔다 대인도 군조비 처강가 까버스 아니 지야일면 저부터 공그랍레스 남도 지야면서도 공그랍레스 텐데 레시티게 대 중바로 봤어 추시 텐들 때는 중바로 봤어.
Now, one thing here is that to the don't be single and it conservation nangyo maras
nangyo tanda chuni 때는 배인도 랑원도 주바데 바까지 동시 최정이도 랑원도 주바까 까베 슈들 최정디 다 nang 말 메가르와 다 최정이 다 까버레 삼지.
Yeah, so you go through this analysis, and then to the mind that's realizing there's nothing existing from its own side, that mind actually is what's appearing is a non-affirming negation. In other words, the conventional object itself also doesn't appear. So it's like, to your meditation, from the perspective of that meditation, not only is there nothing existing from its own side, even the conventional object doesn't appear. So even the conventional object doesn't exist from the perspective of that meditation. And so it's possible to make the mistake of thinking that since not only an object existing from its own side, but even the conventional object doesn't appear to the mind, which is, like focused on the ultimate nature of reality, it must be that even the conventional object doesn't exist. And so then you get this mistaken idea. And in fact, this view has, formed. There is this view, people do hold this view that the best meditation when you want to meditate on reality is just nothing at all, no conceptualizing and taking nothing to mind at all. And so the source of that mistaken idea about how you meditate on emptiness comes from the fact that, to the mind that is realizing emptiness, even the conventional object doesn't appear. No.
가정문제 캡충하고 배전으로 좀 쉬베나 다 시칸다 관계 띵도 아니 따왔다는 매백걸로 리시기 잡아쳐도 아니 랑원을 줘봐대 바까지 유들 둘루중원에 랑원을 줘봐대 도스바 까베 다 깍타르텔라 아니 충이 딩에 버렸다 대코나 시대다 되게 동력이 야냐용 버렸어 다 랑원을 줘봐 까베 깍타르 충이 딩에 있는데 다 충이 되게 된 루트기 임바다스 다 충이 되게 된다 맞춰보지 땡땡 임바다스 디인데 다 군조비 최 에는 된다 마마 좀 땡란 베베 타두들라 충이 에는 리베제스 주바지 아니 yar로 샤인데 다티 쇼지 까버려 쇼지 까도 오면 와 춘이 리베 제수들 내용도 와 제수도 줘봐 또 증거로 된다마 두두스 어디래 춘이 쓰바인도 된다마 두두스 뭐다 뒤체네 에네 가자 문제 캡충아 디 군조비 쳐다 된다면 차 니가를 캡투고 매워 군조비 쳐대 아니 랑은 주밤 된다면 주바 까봐 있네야 아니 춘이디 아니 된다면 주바지 차용인가 캡충하스
And then the way in which the mistake could come up of your negation being too small. I can't think of a better word, but anyway, in other words, you're not negating enough. You're not negating enough. So this would be like, for example, it could be you could meditate on any object, right? So you're analyzing to see whether it exists from its own side and the way that it appears. So at the end, you don't see the existence from you don't see existence from its own side, right? So then that's considered to be, although you didn't find an object existing from its own side, it's considered that what you did find and what you did realize was the ultimate nature, the chunyi, so the reality, the ultimate reality of the object. Okay, so not being able to find an object existing from its own side means you found the ultimate reality of the object. And so people make the mistake of thinking, well, since that ultimate mind has found, has found the ultimate truth the ultimate reality itself, that ultimate reality must exist ultimately. That must be truly existent. And so even though, in other words, even though you've negated existence from its own side on various conventional phenomena, you think that the ultimate reality that you find at the end of that analysis is itself, something that exists ultimately.
Well, that in the that Tanyela. 춘이 돈담도 메스 dinhe질라고도 건네가 데려와서 돈담도 맞춥스 춘이 돈담이 가르스 내루타도래 돈담도 주나 에네 담바 두코래 랑원에 두코래 어때래
라 찌퍼라 돈담바이 돈담바 두바레스 And so to use the terms that we find in the text, we would say that the ultimate reality is something that's ultimate but doesn't exist ultimately. Or another way of putting it, it's true but it doesn't exist truly. It's true means that its way of appearing, so ultimate reality, right? It's true because its way of appearing and its way of being, its actual way of existing, are the same. And then the reason it's not truly existent is because truly existent means like, existing from its own side. No.
That the the Tibetan mare in a teacher double. Bernard Javashinu Yaya Lungdenaya Jingudua Jume Sukta Kalashi. 수경어보 민zamchir 남가야네 민zam모 대체 민zam이 얘기하면서 사실 들어봐 다 디칸데 스트레스 쉬이나 좀시 중화 생각에 당원하는 신도 차 중시 중화 좀시 중화 다 증나란 속에
좀시 중화 생각
누주 네다 주 다도 도마비 중세기 타르투베 두텐 참모 텐다베 중화 아니 사다 추다 메다 룽생엔디 다 중화 참모데 다 코라 자와지 제베 차네 디 차네네 중화 대단테 따바 멤버 제베 차네 중화 메산로 and Zimber Chevichan, Juma Sassando, and Yo Chan, Lungsando, or Tusre Matoji, Mus Diresene, law of Shigi Medding, the Tadens and Nia Medevit. So she Juma Tadens and Nia Meva Inas, Tell Tene, and Tushabegi, and Jungyugi, Susola Sob Tuzote, and Tadens and Nia Canayers. Carresna, Susola Sob Tuzoganga, and Towe on the Shaz, Mingo on the Shazam Revas, Jume Suta, Kalashi, Sugi, Mobo, Minzam Chers. Takoti Tatan Roswan?
No.
Some she Juma, and the Tadans and Nia Mabaina, tell a ten Chunshabegi, and Sujan Rabat take it, and Tadans and Kavanya, Carresna, Mingo on the Shazam Red was, Sujumo, Minzam Chers. Oh, that Sujan Rabat Tori Yedebegi, and Duzo, and Minzam on the Shabajin Ruyabaina, Tori Mebe, Namgala Soba, but Tuzo, and Ming on the Shabati Indies, Namgayan and Minzamos, Namgayan and Minzam res. That told you do, oh, that Tamatamacale Jav shoot, Minzam the page thousands and Yanguya is a re, some that Minzam the Damba to Yanguya is a re, some the Yangadua. Oh, Telia and Gombuludugi. Teacher Minzam Nigames. Oh, Mintea thousands and Yamartas. Minzam Tea, Minzam res. Oh, that the Konanga shoes, teacher Minzam Nigames, simply Nuacham shoes to us. Oh,
no.
Didn't Tagi, Kajang the Kapchung Kayatini, double.
No. Now there's something very similar to that, not exactly the same, but very similar to that. This is there's a verse from the fundamental wisdom verses of Nagarjuna, which His Holiness the Dalai Lama very often quotes. So this verse, it makes the point that the very subtle elements from which all the gross objects, like for example, the atoms and molecules, particle, that kind of level of particle, which we're not able to see, so very subtle in that sense. So those cannot be found when you look for them in their basis of imputation. Okay, so those very subtle objects, which are the basis from which the gross objects are formed, they can't be found when you look for them in their basis of imputation. So they are, mere imputations. So then they're not something that you can really physically point out. We know that, for example, that the fire element, we can sort of understand the fire element through its function of maturing and developing things, and then the earth element through the solidity, and also the air element through movement. So we can infer their existence through that, but otherwise there's nothing you can point out. So they also so those are mere imputations. So in that case, of course, the forms, the forms on a gross level, which are made up of those more subtle, objects, those subtle particles, they also are mere imputations, because everything that they're composed of is a mere imputation. So the gross object that's formed from those subtle atoms and so forth, those are also mere imputations. So now those what you call it, gross forms. So those themselves are they have the attributes of being tangible and obstructing, right? So if they are mere imputations, then of course, Nagarjuna goes on to say, then of course, something like space, which is completely devoid of any tangibility or obstructiveness, of course, that's a mere imputation. So then, in case you might get to the end of that kind of reasoning and come to the conclusion, well, then mere imputation, that must have some kind of like inherent existence or some kind of true existence. So Nagarjuna finishes that verse by saying, and also mere imputation is also merely imputed. No.
Mm-hmm.
So this is similar, isn't it? Similar.
But that Tinegita Gaja Gadang Tolia, Chapchijungi, Netuzo, Shirakangwa, Ketchmuche, that Tindig Jojo Tinjungi, Energy Batilatane, Rangshime, and Amat Musiati, Candice Chajaresana, Tapan Nuguchi Dembamete, Tendi in Bichsano. Nuguchi Rang Sinuma to Tendi in Bichsano. That Tusine, Tajo going Rubas, the Ribatirvas. Jojo Tinjus in the Tendi in Bichsach. Tendi in Bichship, Sik Tigaran, Sik the Tagarares, Rede, Anne, or Murmawa, that Chandola Soba to the Tendi in Biches, that the Mamet the Sigim, Daduma to the Sigire, or Tindegi, Tendi in Bichsagina, or Tendi Kelling Rete, Tenda Tendi, Gunde Tendi. That Tene, Ranju Tabuchi Tolia, Tendi, Dambame, the Tendi in Michilavina, Tende, Tendi Koa, the country resna, Chashir Derbetende. That Tangu Tawalaya and Mabaya Dingi, there's Kunu Tunu in Yiji, Kansachilima, Tendi in Michilayan, Toba Wangi Shatsam, Ming Tanya Yongi Shatsam, Tendi, Ming the Tobal Ten. What then Juma? What those says? Sick Tendi in which said, Chibuchian in Nayan, Kulumindava, Salum, Koasalamindava, in Dusche, Sharia Devachi.
So that's something which is really important then to get some kind of understanding of these points to these pitfalls to avoid the pitfall of your object of negation being too extensive, not being extensive enough. So then, as for how dependent arising functions to help you identify, recognize the mother emptiness. So it's in a way it's pretty straightforward. If we state it in the form of a sort of line of reasoning or a syllogism, we could say the sprout as a subject, it's non-truly existent because of being a dependent arising. So this is something which the various schools could accept. Those terms they would be able to accept, but what they understand from it would vary. It wouldn't be the same. So what, in other words, so we've got the reason because it's a dependent arising, and they have different ideas about what dependent arising means. So according to the realists, so they were talking about the Vaibhashikas and the Sautrantikas. For them, they would understand dependent arising only in terms of results arising through depending upon causes. So they were probably not actually think in terms of like not being truly existent. They would probably say not existing as a self. So they would say it doesn't exist as a self because of being a dependent arising, because of depending upon causes and conditions. So that's their understanding of dependent arising. Then with the Svatantrikas, they also accept dependent arising, and for them, it would be limited to the understanding that it refers to everything depending upon its parts. So they would say everything is dependent arising because of depending upon its parts. Then with the Prasangikas, so, for those of us who have that kind of, I don't know, like faith and interest or appreciation for, let's say, appreciation for or interest in the Prasangika system, who have that kind of familiarity with the Prasangika way of thinking, then we would understand dependent arising on an even more subtle level. We would understand it to be referring to the fact that everything is, that everything comes into being depending upon names and the conceptual mind. And so again, they all accept that reason because it's a dependent arising, but what they understand from that becomes more refined as you progress through the schools. In other words, their idea becomes more, the idea of what dependent arising means becomes more and more subtle.
Telia, Tandandi, Jangulam Zongo, Tindi Tebenala. Penze Kugin, Roalas. Member to Katzalwasta, Penze Kusan, Sangijum Dende, Roakuna, Pembersheba, Sangijum Dende, Karangi, and Roanam Chita, Koya Chimatelia, Toya, member to Katzawa, Tembe Nimbu Tombanis, Navasanji with Tembegi, Ne Tartu, Tombanitres, Tembe Nimbu Tombani. That thing Neve Tombani, Sheagi, Guten, Dameva, but that. Never chase Tembe Nimbu Tombani, Neve Gusen, Dameva, Tenjin Rava, Jungus, or that Tombani, Dubjayat, but the Tachi Tanya Chicha to say, never you did, Tenji density rest, Tembe Nimbu Tombani, Neve Gusen, Dameva, Tenjin Rava, Jungus. That Tendrava Chipana, that Rangunum, Damba Matute, Sungina, Rangunamatu, the Tendi image Sungina, or those cheje, pass soon do. And at the moment, the tending which or Duce, soon you do that Chiroba Tabutella and Matubetin Dures, Gawatan and Matuba, Tondi, Kiki looks, Gaw Chiroba Tabut, Tindicia, and Titsik, Ribat Tambaina, Matubetenzi, or Tendi Chetam Tendi Maris, Cheche, Tamokora, Deumaris, Chojukora Tugumaris, Matubetenzi. That round the Ranjuba Menchelaya. In Gavetin Torres, Gawa Karachi Chagrasna, oh, the Tendi Yina, and Tautan Sene, Tanya Tabba Tautan Savas and Yaya which Goris, the Indu, or Tanya Tabba Tautan Savas and Nigu Medeva, Yinde, and Tendi in Beslana, then Tini Gandors, Ramon Matu. Oh, what it?
Not it.
What it? Did it?
Chendonija. Nija.
Tinder, Marella shop, Digioda. Oh, Carisma. Tendi Yina, Thousand Sani. Yeah, Gordas, Tanya Tabaton Thousand Yemen. They may chad dures, or sister Tustin, and Gavetin dures. And what did it?
No.
Tenanga Chamboching rest some years.
No.
Tandeti.
No.
Gawatan Madu said, Tindi to be Tigitolia, or Tianangachi rest some years.
So first I was saying more and more subtle. That might be true or not, but anyway, what Rinpoche said was more and more profound. So then, in Lama Tsongkhapa's dependent arising prayers, he, there's one verse where Lama Tsongkhapa talks about how the Buddha, who is the one who helps all sentient beings, and in order to help them, he wants to free them all from cyclic existence. And the way to be free of cyclic existence is through understanding emptiness. So the Buddha taught emptiness. And then Lama Tsongkhapa goes on to make the, make the observation that actually the reasoning that the Buddha taught in order to be able to understand dependent arising. Emptiness was dependent arising, and Rinpoche says, Lama Tsongkhapa says, this is like the most amazing, the peerless, like unequaled reason to use for understanding emptiness, because with dependent arising, with that reasoning, you avoid both of the two extremes, the extreme of nihilism and the eternalist extreme. And so so the way the reasoning goes then is, we would say, it's not truly existent because of being dependent arising. So Lama Tsongkhapa points out in this dependent arising praise that this reason, which is like the most amazing reason, the unequal, peerless reason for establishing emptiness, for the non-Buddhist philosophers, as far as they're concerned, that's a reason which is not established. What that means is, for them, not everything is a dependent arising. So when you say it isn't truly existent because of being a dependent arising, then that implies, that if something is a dependent arising, it shouldn't be truly existent. But they would say this isn't something that applies to everything. So for them, it's not established, a reason that's not established. And then for the Svatantrikas, okay, so below the Prasangikas, you got the Svatantrikas. So for them, it would be a contradictory reason. And in fact, for not just Svatantrikas, everybody, all the Buddhist philosophical systems up to Svatantrika, for all of them, it would be a contradictory reason. The reason for that is that, as far as they're concerned, so when we say doesn't exist truly, doesn't exist from its own side because of being a dependent arising, as far as they're concerned, so where we say it doesn't exist from its own side, we're saying it's because you can't find it when you look for it in its base of imputation, right? As far as they're concerned, anything which is dependent arising has to exist. And if it exists, you have to be able to find it when you look for it in its base of imputation. For them, if you can't find it when you look for it in its basis of imputation, it means it doesn't exist at all. So for them, that reasoning doesn't exist truly because of being independent arising is a contradictory reason. No.
Tindi imbeches ribati gitsen ko be ina yang ane ti tindi gi neti ane sablu gi thone ane khabar dinde chembu dugu yobati dande te sungu duwas o te dinanga chik duwas.
No, in fact, yeah, I missed off. So Rinpoche said at the end of the last bit, so that this really is quite an important point. And so what's important is that even though the same reasoning even though the idea of dependent arising is something that they all accept, but still there's a difference in how profound their understanding of dependent arising is.
Oh, that tindeche indi that tindir sayagi that go indi ane rangyubagi kandichin de gorda and niga demba meba umabtawa shenyichiro rangyubaya umabare tangyubaya umabare ta ngoni meba maware niga tindir taagi deme dugu yore ta rangyubagi tindir taagi deme duyumbe kabliya ane demba matube pela jumashagore tangyubagi demba matube pela takta tindegi peshatang tola inaya nechimbo yedeba karisna yumaken said that tingsang aranzu ji tongda yumaken de kashi that bejenane ma sunya yumaken dodan chebina ane yumaken gi diushin ane ngazeki leje ane ngaze tamne ma talan so tuyun tada langjen tuyun du ane kora tushi dishin talantu patruya tila ta tambo shiji diushinji gogudu has ta tela ngaze gi leba wangi talantu na ta re mato chi gi töngo to talang tomba chirwas tini 니조 지기 토네 당하는 게 여러 와스 베틴나시 랑 천이 주버 나처럼 맞주버 로이 왕기 샤바지 고그레스 타니다부 따도 자스는 예요 제 고그레스 다드네 유랑 투모마이 베딜루빙은 주베 동아지양 고레 니조레스 딘자 로너메라 나왕게 샤바마이 유랑 투모마이 베딜루빙은 네 주베 동아세 어떻게 라거와 거디 베텔리아 리바치 도아스 다 탄주와게 마 수인도 탁자 티샤버바스 랑원의 마주베 벨라 베나 탁제 띵도 다 남서리서리 틴데지 갑리아 레 서리서리 갑라 아니 킬루 두단다와 틴데지리아 아니 남서리시 임바다 틴데지를 때네 탁자디 주오냐베 인 탁자를 인 준징을 로치기도 와스 데 탁자 준징을 로티 아니 다 시탁제 띵기 차시 강내야 아니 주냐요 말바스 다 주기 풍볼라 아니 준징을 로치기기 요래 될래야 아니 주기 풍부기 다 풍봉하게 차시 강내 제베 있나야 아니 주디오사지 다주잖아 냐베마 찌부찌냐 레스 되게 차네 아니 랑원의 마투베 벨리아 아니 탄유바기 벨리아 탁자디 샤야디 타두두두 샤야디 딱고 투모마이 베케지 가르스나 dakshingweni yode moga oti special thone khabar yungudwa otire gendel sertan chidwe.
Now, using dependenrizing as a reason, then as a logical reasoning, as a logical reason. So let's look at the difference between the Svatantrikas and the Prasangikas, who are both Madhyamikas, right? So now for the actually, we can understand there's quite a big difference between the two in simply from the fact that the analogy that they use for showing that things are not truly existent, and specifically for the Prasangikas, not truly existent, it's the same as saying doesn't exist from its own side. They use different analogies. So now what that means is that for the Svatantrikas, they use the analogy of an illusion, and then for the Prasangikas, they rely upon the analogy of a striped rope appearing as a snake. So now, as for the illusion, so I mean, whether these days we can see such things, but anyway, the way that it's explained in the texts is that a magician is able to apply certain, I know, spells or mantras and and so forth to pebbles and the sticks and so on, and that makes them appear so then they appear as a horse and or an elephant, for example, that kind of thing. So the language that we would use is that the conjurer or the magician has like emanated these illusory objects, the horse and the elephant. So you can tell a lot about the Svatantrika's understanding of ultimate reality in terms of the analogy they use, because with the analogy, you do have to have something there that's from the side of the object. So there is the appearance of the illusory horse and elephant, but there also has to be something from the side of the object. You have to have those sticks and stones. So you do need something from the side of the object and also from the side of the mind. And so this is like we were saying the other night when we were talking about their object of negation, which is whatever it is, an object existing by way of its own unique way of being, without depending upon appearing or being posited by an unmistaken mind, appearing to an unmistaken mind. So so then when it comes to the so anyway, they use that analogy because for them it's a good way of showing that you need something from the side of the object and something from the side of the mind as well. You need that the combination of the two. But then for the Prasangikas, so they use the example of the pile of striped rope appearing as a snake. So what this means is that if you've got a pile of striped rope that's sort of like piled up so that in under certain conditions, like at dusk, it can look like there's a snake there. So in the case of this rope appearing as a snake, there isn't anything, you cannot find a snake in that pile of rope. A snake, it appears to be a snake, but if you examine, you cannot find a snake at all in that pile of rope. And this is exactly the same as when there's actually a snake there appearing as a snake. Also there, if you search for the snake within its aggregates, you won't be able to find a snake. So yeah, so that's that gives you an idea of their understanding of the ultimate reality.
Takta dunzingi tigi lo tigi chitar sungata to takta sinne du zani nya meba teta duigi pumbola and dunzingi lo tigi and duigi pumbola tem dunzingi lo tigi and duigi pumbi chashe kaneya and du singi nya meba niga nya meba imba chibu chigyan rebas that it nya meba chibu oh tawana ene ta duty sojagrwa studi sojagumarwa ta du tanyegi chawachigi yor takta dunzi lo dig sone shinji ene du tanyegi chawachigi yomare ta de karares ene yugi tingne rangone meba ina ta tobe kanso chagrwa ene reta de rangyuba menche grba rangyuba menchegi ta yugi ting ta den zani nye ji mena en tobe kansu chadu duas jeje o dus ta tobatili sheindu yandi kora nenga che surchi grba o ta telia en rang ta den zani rangone trubni nye meba jiba ina ya 타니기 차와 제 누미누기 개발 요레스 타니기 온 샤마샤기 개발 요레스 타자 눈징을로 타제 띵도 주 타니기 온 샤투고 말에 가르스나 타니도 잡아 아니 타니기 메네바 얘네 된담바 처음에 메네바스네 개주 숨된 듯들 리그 말에 다들 된담부터 이제 고고에 나면은 어디래 다 duigi phongbola mine dunjing lote ane tobe kanso raya mare otira du tanya wang shaba 정도 마세 될 tanya cheme nego mares dus cheje ane juchende sheyinde ane tobe kanso membegi ane ta 가서 유생한다 들려야 tanya keju sumden sung야ti 다 뱀미스비 내가 좀 차고도 왔어.
If we go into that a little bit more, particularly this analogy of the mind thinking that there's a snake there when actually it's just a pile of striped rope. So in the case of the pile of striped rope, and in the case of the aggregates of the snake, you cannot find the snake, right? So in that way, they are exactly the same. Still, there is a difference in terms of the function. So the actual snake can bite you, but the rope can't bite you. So why is that? So yeah, so the Svatantrikas, would say that if you can't find it, if you can't find the object in the, if it exists, even though you can't find it, so it's completely, you know, like a creation of the mind or imputation by the mind, by the conceptual mind, then it should be so if it's complete, you know, if it's totally 100%, you know, imputation by the conceptual mind, then it should be that whatever the conceptual mind thinks, it must be true. It was like, you know, a conceptual mind could make anything, make anything exist. So you wouldn't be able to make that kind of distinction. So, so the thing is that there is a difference, and it's not because of, you know, one being a snake from its own side and one not being a snake from its own side. The difference is in the case of the actual snake, it fulfills 3 criteria. One is that it's the object of a conventional mind. On top of that, it's not like contradicted, let's say, literally harmed, but I think more like contradicted by a conventional valid mind, and nor is it contradicted by, or undermined in a sense, harmed by an ultimate mind, a mind that engages in ultimate analysis. So something. So it's because of the fact that you can say that of the actual snake that it fulfills those 3 criteria, then therefore you can say it does conventionally exist, whereas the rope doesn't fulfill those criteria, therefore it isn't, you know, conventionally a snake.
근데 타니 제주 숨된 소야데 타니도 잡았는데 아니 로리야 다가 샤브다가 직된 작설이야 그래서 로리야 샤브다가라제 답에는 토요일에 미래 선배이나 그 타니를 잡으지래 어디 미숙녀지를 미래 선배이나 타니를 잡으지래 타니를 잡았어 다 콜리야 조 개치시디 근데 미드업 수업 수시하고들래 미래 당보 삼바 있나야 어 미래 민도와 미숙녀를 대도 왔음에 아니 타니에 참아신다지기 디젤리움 디뉴도와 어 디니 아니 타니에 참아신기 미네바 탁다 두들라 어 탁다를 해도 왔어야 되기 탁과를 왔음에 준진티 건네도와 줄리아 아니 어디 두레민도 왔어야지 여말 어디 디젤리아 준진 로텔리아 타니에 참아신 게 내고 말해. 다 디인자 안에 타니에 참에 미네버스. 다 때네 돈담자별로 미네버스인데 다 타시엔 값을 수치래. 답변은 최 탐제 랑원의 주바즘에 로티 타니에 참에 네트웨어 요 말을라 타니에도 다 쳐오래. 타니에 참에 네트웨어 요 말. 다디 랑원의 주바 넘버 주바 사야지. 아니 돈담자별로 티 내고 하래. 래. or the and no.
Now, with that first one, the first of those 3 criteria, so that really all that simply means is that it appears to some conventional mind. So it appears to some mind or other, like for example, and then then just simply, in other words, and simply believing it. So the very fact that there is a mind that believes it means that the first condition is fulfilled. It meets the first condition, the first criterion. So like, for example, when you've got a pile of stones from a distance that is a little bit shaped like a person. So from a distance you think, oh, there's a person there. So that means that that you have the first criterion, because there is a mind that thinks there is a person there. So in a way, the main thing is this would be the second one. So with the second one, in the case of the pile of stones appearing as a person, there is some other conventional valid mind that contradicts the mind thinking that there's actually a person there. So, somebody goes up and they see that there's just a pile of stones there. So that would be a conventional valid mind that undermines this misconception that it's a person there. And it's like that also in the case of the striped rope. So this, apprehending or believing that there's a snake there when actually it's just a pile of striped rope. So that it does meet the first criterion, because you think there is a mind thinking that there's a snake there, but then that's contradicted by a valid conventional mind that sees that there's just rope there. But then in the case of the actual snake, when there's actually a snake there, then of course it wouldn't be undermined or contradicted by some later valid. It doesn't have to be later anyway. It wouldn't be contradicted by a valid mind that sees that it's just a snake. Sees that it's just a rope there, because it isn't just a rope; it's actually a snake. So then, in the third one also is well. Anyway, I don't know. So it's like, just in case, for example, if we think in terms of like somebody thinking that there is an object snake or whatever, existing from its own side, truly existent or existing from its own side, then because there is a mind thinking that there's a snake existing from its own side, it meets the first criterion. A conventional valid mind wouldn't be able to contradict that. What would contradict it would be an ultimate mind, one that is able to analyze the ultimate way of being of the thing, and that would be a valid mind that sees that it doesn't exist from its own side, and therefore it wouldn't meet the third condition. No.
That 단대 계제대야 개 전부 차가 가르스나 아니 타니에 된라 넘버 제미 차스 so nang the machamba tiljabe yomaris ineya shi tanye de and daran shayaris dindiji sungde duas ta tanye de yobina tanye de yuzu dirwada karare dire dandedi denne tingi tuan jigden number dunji dugu memege namje meba jigden yilede rangi yala tene tabayis ta ming tanyegi wangi ane yoba shabayis ta namnge ribe jawa chigi yonare namdung ribe jawa chigi yonare kanda tadun zane nyigi marabas tadun zane menye du ane di yoba de karisha agrasna ta ming tanyegi wangi yoba 다 디간데 샤이스 타니에 원게 여바 조인스 어디인도 다 타니에 생기디 조녀기 참아지 여다매 생긴디 뇌다만데 생기디 내가 좀 자기 알아 단데디 데스 디체송에 데 남주야 야외신도 야야 룽데 나야들에 풍리 풍볼 내심이 델라 때문에 칠 때문에 디신식과 풍대미 디신식과 강시 인선에 지다 타대다 평준 때문에 주니다 초점대 에는 나이고네 에는 제바체네 디신식과 이거 말이 나야 이거 말스 다 매버베 쓰는데 매버 말에 민기 타니의 원기 다 여버레스 민기 타니의 원기 여버티 에는 가반에 지 가반에 연구 열었으나 반den다와 잡고 우만죽배 싱다들이야 남제 넘버 둥기 잡아 지고 와 되네 팅이 두염 직된도 넘버 둥기스 다 싱다데 넘버 둥기 잡아 챘네 예요 말와 되네 팅이 두염 직된도 넘버 둥기 루큐 미메기 남제 매바 직된 일랜들 랑기 야라 때네 따바이 따나 싱다 여버도 가르친 적으로서나 아니 코랑기 야라 때네 샤바 민기 타녀 원기 아니 여봐 어디레스 어디인도 다 타녀 원기 여생인데 타녀기 원기 여봐 적당 어디 내가 전부 차가 알았어 그래
근데 타니를 나머지 자세히 더 그래요네
그래 다 타녀들이 여봐 타녀 원기 여스 다 타녀 원기 샤잠 티기 마침바 디 강네 양교 샤바 대상의 맞은 뭐 부바도 가와도 제가 두는 이거 말해 그래서 타녀 전에 샤잠 대강의 샤줄만도 양교제 요 말했어 타녀 된라 양교 네 타니가 왕게 샤바 되게 유여바 맞춤 봐 양교제네 아니 보면냐 야마르스
이거기도 스타일은 나머지미자 세디데 남삼기 말씀하지 아니 다지 제거래서 then this is also very important, I think. 여당들이 마다마제거든. So here's another important point. So in the Bodhisattva, isn't it? The Taniden Namajimisha. So one should. It literally says one should not analyze the conventional truths. What that means is that if you don't just leave things at on the level of appearances, but really analyze, then you don't find anything, right? So that's not what posits the conventional existence of things. So what this means is that so analyze, that means you have the there's various ways you can analyze. There's a fivefold reasoning, sevenfold reasoning. So the fivefold reasoning, this is like the verse that His Holiness very often quotes from Nagarjuna, where he talks about the self not being the aggregates, not being the collection of the aggregates, and so forth. I can't remember exactly how that verse goes, but anyway, there's the one that says, about it mentions how the Tathagata is. Oh, yeah. So it's the analysis where of the Tathagata, the Tathagata not being one with the aggregates, separate from the aggregates, the possessor of the aggregates, possessed by the aggregates, and so forth. So there's 5 points that one can go through there, and then in there's the sevenfold analysis, which we find in the Madhyamakavatara. So he does the Chandrakirti. Chandrakirti goes through this sevenfold analysis in the context of a cart, so analyzing a cart. And so anyway, either way, or whichever way you analyze and search for the thing in its space of invitation, you cannot find it. So then how does it exist? So what you're left with is that the thing isn't totally non-existent because it can't be found through the analysis, but it exists conventionally through the force of names and terms. Names and terms. So anyway, so the way that you posit things conventionally is without analysis. When you analyze, you can't find the thing, but that's not what posits the thing as existing conventionally. How you posit the various objects as existing conventionally is without analyzing in the basis of imputation. So I hope I got that.
That he cutting is na tindigi tinsik sadi ma tal tene and damba matuba in a rangon matu dusche ten be yundu gaja country single side. Then Tumdara Susu tindin the tankaris, Tangi Tagisha about the Tomdoric Lavi Kajanda, Tumdara Susugi, tindin words in Tankanderis. Oh, that Tumdo Oma Ranjuba Manchegi, Tindi singing Ming Tanya Chigi or day Tanjubagi looked up to Chebaina and Tigi Kandar Karingo. Gave things like to hear. Oh, those tend to hear. Or you say under Dotugumeva.
No.
Tended down Tanya Davata Zan, Nia Yevani, she doing Devinza, and Tanya Davata Zan, Nia Yomar, Tendis and the Gavaris, or that Tendis. That then that Tendigi rangshim mebe pelia and ji Juma Shago to ten, Tata Shago to ten. That in degi Ribati Matene, that Tobe Council Maimba, Leo Kansha Maimba, and Tanya Wangi Joe said, Tanya Kabra Sunding Jodamanjo, but that to Kangachi Tinditaji, Rashime Batan and Beba Kalia, that to some can't go to us. What did you need? Tangi Charicurity Shubre.
Oh, no. To summarize a little bit what I've been talking about this evening, which I think, these are really quite important points to think about, to try to understand. So looking at the idea of using dependent arising as a reason for establishing that things don't exist truly or don't exist from their own side, you need to understand the object of negation. It's really important to understand what it is that's being negated. When you say emptiness, it means it implies the non-existence of something, doesn't it? So non-existence of what? What is it that's being negated? Then I've been talking about how the different schools of, the different tenet systems, different schools within Buddhism, they all accept dependent arising, but how they understand it, what they think it means, isn't the same as you go from it's not the same all across the schools. Then the Svatantrikas and below, they accept the idea of, things existing through the force of names and terms and so on. But nevertheless, when the Prasangikas say that there's nothing that exists from its own side because of being a dependent arising, for them, everybody up to the Prasangikas, not including the Prasangikas, everybody else would say this is a contradictory reason. Why? Because for them, everything which exists has to exist from its own side, has to be findable. And then again, very important to understand why it is that the Svatantrikas would use the analogy of an illusion, whereas the Prasangikas use the analogy of a pile of rope, striped rope. So, and what is also really important, which I've been talking about, is that even though everything is a mere imputation by the mind, and a mere, you could say, a mere creation by the mind. That doesn't mean to say that whatever the mind creates or imputes has to exist. In this, so in other words, it just because we say everything is mere imputation by the mind, that doesn't mean to say that everything that anything the conceptual mind believes exists does exist. Because everything that conventionally exists, the way we know it conventionally exists is through examining whether it meets those three criteria that I was talking about. So this is also important to understand.
Mm-hmm. That in the in Russian, that Nangchola, Nyon Dendang, Dongchola, Nyon Dendang Tola. Sungzin Natsodi, Ame Zumba, Kinchi Ponjurde, Ame Dunsix. That the Nanjol Nyon Dendang the Imbare. That Karesna Dandeti.
Chikare, somebody there, Shibere.
Sungzin Natsodi, Ame Zumba. Kichi Punjudi, Ame Chitagaye.
Zuzin Nasodi, Ame
Zumba, Kichi Punjudi, Ame Zunzik. Oh, that Zumba said that Zumdan Jirba, the Karasana, Chujan Natsobe, Juba, Chichinangi, na chobe choban damindas ji ye deba digit chamanlo rangon chobe tongbe rangshin le in shar yong bachir bas rangon chobe tongbe rangshin le and chujung kunzo digit cha der mado rangon ma to chujung kunzo digit yong ji yo marwa di inza sungje na chodi ame zumbas
Chinangi de church.
Chinang chut sungwa yuda yujen sere ta sungwa gigi dubadan gigi ma dubasine gigi sere ta teche ta kiji pogyurde ame zunsis ta kandar ji gyawad chiwala sobe kowe ngamsu yani jikta tende ji tegeteya taodan zane nyeyaji yo mare rangon tube tongbe rangshin le ene kunzo samgi keji phugyu digiti ti yongtwe chires di inza ene de ngotole ya rangon tongde yena ya ene chi nambale ya keji phugyu digiti yonggu yoba inza ene junsik na shires zumba na shi.
Now let's look at the verse 3, the last two lines. This diverse subject-object world is my mother's gentle smile. This cycle of birth and death, her deceptive words. So when it says this diverse subject-object world, so subject-object world, that refers to everything external, everything internal. You could say everything animate and inanimate. So all of these things, they can, they're my mother's gentle smile means that they could only exist on the basis of being empty. Something which, it's not like something which exists from its own side is appearing as those various external and internal objects. Something which is empty of existing from its own side is appearing as those objects. So in that's what we understand from saying that they're all my mother's. Remember, the mother is emptiness, and my mother's gentle smile. Then this cycle of birth and death, her deceptive words. So the birth and death. So birth and death are empty. And because of the fact that they're empty, they're able to take place. They're able to, they can happen. And so being empty and yet, so empty of existing from their own side and yet appearing is like the false word. It's like the false words of the mother.
That junsi sayagi tanyeti. Yongga gyusan karasana ene tehen tambar matruba yina yang ene kunzob zangi sangen na chogi le na chogi yongde ji yedeba tela ene ji ta tame bagi ta susukje wonnamgi ji ta tinde ji nezu de machine ene kunzob da thendabe ji nezu de machine kandu nawa tedar dambar sungo gone ene karnag le sange na so ji saje in call ko yobe inza and that lube sur chaba inza dunsix.
So then it's where it says her deceptive words, her false words, false words, deceptive words, and false words. So why is this expression used? The reason is that although good and bad and so forth don't exist ultimately, still they can happen. Still they do happen. So now normal people, like the, as we might say, like the childish, immature, they don't understand that. They don't understand that something which is completely empty of existing on any ultimate level, is appearing to them. Something which actually doesn't exist ultimately is appearing good. It doesn't exist ultimately, and bad doesn't exist ultimately, and so on. So in other words, there is an appearance of good and bad and so forth as existing from their own side, and such childish, immature people, normal people, they believe that appearance. Then believing that appearance, they create karma, and then having created the karma, then they have to experience suffering as a result. So it's in that sense that those expressions of the mother, are like false words to such people.
Dayan tande di sunjin anso de ame zumba jeji phunju de ame junsis o digi ya tönchik dik nanga chimo khandich ting du selaba ina tongba ngebe gi neti juchenla tene sange gi chigle sange da tuzo kanga debo chenen jotuya di betita korangi namjuliya sharyong chigre sambarab chige o duchen chu tongba tenjung tosya di yang kechmbures 하도 단단히 가장기 중 쇼자지 쉬베이나 양골라면 정거 첨벌에 지준 잠배한기 셰시 윤두 지준 잠배한기 동초래야 낭초도 직수체고였어 나와다 동반이 열와 다 동초스나 가제 동바 들어와 다 드네 가제 동윤두 군조식 동바마인바 아니 지 레상에서 서부터 강다가 아니 대부체네 조투야데 낭초들와 낭초를 즉수 제거했네 다 잠배양기 믹스기 수르트 숨바 임바레 낭초를 즉수 제거스 다 대체인도 랑신기 마투바 따와 땡는 베베 디갑들이야 아니 상에다 지야 나조 차리에바디 동반이래 아니 인상 되게 차트버 레다스네 아니 롤이야 대부체네 조투야 어디 개첨부레스네 숨진나초데 아메준바 기지푸규데 아메준지스네 난조를 직심부 제고 그랬어 어디 숨거야 이 말에
잠배양기데 칸디스티
가자 지주 잠배양래야 제rum체기 네타와드 카르카르스야 지루왔다 디디 엔타와지 양조 소로나 제르와 어다 티 아버지 단다 아버지 고금이도 쉬어봐 어때다 걔랑 넘토 찍라 넘 찍라 나와라 자침부 찍고스 나조라 자침부 찍고스 동조다 나조 나동니기 나네 나와라 즉수 침부 제고스
나동니가 나와 낭초디 개체부 찍으래
나조도 개체부 찍고래스 어딘에 단다 쉬위
then there's another thing about what these expressions, the mother's gentle smile and the deceptive words, the meaning we can take from these. So one thing is when you've understood emptiness and on that basis of your understanding of emptiness, you're able to quite comfortably posit the existence of good and bad. Then that means that for you, those good and bad and so forth, they are like expressions of emptiness. So it's in that sense, the gentle smile of the mother. So indicating you can very comfortably see how cause and effect, good and bad, are still quite valid, even though they don't exist from their own side. And then where it says the false words of the mother. So to understand this, if we think back to the what I was saying last night, you remember that Rinpoche, Lama Tsongkhapa, asked Manjushri, so is my view the Prasangika view or the Svatantrika view? And Manjushri said it's neither. And then Lama Tsongkhapa asked him to explain, again, what emptiness, what is the meaning of emptiness? And so Manjushri explained to him, and then Lama Tsongkhapa said he still couldn't understand. So in his advice, in Manjushi's advice to Lama Tsongkhapa, he said it was that he should put great emphasis on the side of appearances. In other words, he should consider, of the two, the sort of the side of things being empty and the side of appearances. He should emphasize the appearances. So, when we talk about the side of of emptiness, that's talking about what's being negated, the object of negation, what's being negated. And so he was giving him advice to be able to see that things are empty, and at the same time, very comfortably to be able to posit the conventional existence. So, so this is something that I want to explain. This idea, considering the side of appearances to be the most important.
Oh, that delia lamrim chambutan lamrim jumbuni ginale dindi sungduan di sikdi nanga chambuduwa ta dindi ta inare kande ine ji rangone modu tan bebe ribe number 2 7nas dia ribe number 7nas yuding to rang ngo chuba chungse kya mindu samyaji koaji nyayung gres ta ko nyambatans dela tene tade nawa dinam standa ngaran chogi ji rirawa kangjin chokzula so do nawa dinam ane pimbundo chawa zamla michegi sta ji ji pimbu sayati ta ji bongbong ruji ta pa de yeba ruji dindejil koyaji manda pimbundo chawa zamla michegi tenda nis 우메 tumtal 메신스다 탄주베기 tumtal 가부여봐 나 직제 랑신 매베기 내주든데 고야제 랑신 매베 줄 텐든도 태바 탐제라 텐다와디 용그레스 랑농어 저 중세기 민두 냠바다 델라데네 다데 나와도 페이지 신진사 매바 동참점 러시아야 어디디
예로라지 this
예로라지 어디 단주에 우메 둔달 메시 랑심메베 출 텐드 드 태바 탐제를 원라스 알던 디바도 디체가 이 양절로 거서 말와 리베 넘버 제바나 유딩도 랑고 저바 중세자 민두 냠바탕 델라테네 다데 나완디나 빈빈도 차와 잠라 미체기 텐다와네 우메 둔달 메시 랑심메베 출 텐드 태바 탐제를 원라스
텐두세데
라바 권용지 접접 권용지
라 in the Lamrim Chenmo, the great exposition of the stages of the path, and also in the middling exposition of the stages of the path by Kyabje Jhado Rinpoche, in both of those, he makes the point that that it's not so it's not so remarkable that that a person can go through the analysis, rational analysis into the ultimate way of being of the thing, of things, and then reach the conclusion that things don't exist from their own side, and then through the meditation on that for things to take on a sort of a vague appearance, almost like they almost look like they're disappearing. So like normally things have a very solid, very concrete appearance to, right? This vivid appearance. So through the force of that meditation, then things not seeming to have such a concrete, solid existence. He said that's not enough, because actually even somebody who has who is like convinced by the or has some kind of appreciation for the Prasangika understanding of emptiness, but doesn't have a really deep understanding of it, even such a person can reach that kind of can have that kind of experience of things seeming to kind of like vanish or disappear. No.
Tan dinis che namla rang ngoy tube rangshi maluba kikbatans ta rangon tube tsu petita maluba kikbatan tetar kikbe rangshi meba tinila rang namsha nome tu joba la ngeba tingne jomba the landela sobe namsha debuchen jotuya namsha nome tu rang sangengi chaje namsha tuzu neme tu joba ngeba tingne drunwa nizo su joba shindu kawas da shindu kawe ne dins kasayan dinitos
neme tu se de debuchen right
sangen tang ji lende da tuzu ki namsha tuzo pe debuchen jotuya gaza rangun tuba kabe shutela di debuchen
gyawa kankai meba che
gendu meba
so dires
wala de kasati dires ta kala kaksati
kasa
umetawa kala kaksati nangjodir kala kaksares gaja gazam di nawa pimbu che zuzuya meba sorti tinde ka mares gaja kabe shutene tene sangeda junreda namshat debochen jotuya ngeba keyonati ngeba teletene keyonati ta kala kaksatires ngeba tingnen dong.
So what's really, so that's not so remarkable. That's not so surprising. What's really important is that within the, so having completely, totally negated existence from its own side, then within that kind of like, within that kind of certainty, being able to very comfortably posit the existence of the conventional world of karma and its results, good and bad, comfortably in the sense like, feeling there's no contradiction at all, no sense at all of contradiction. So he says that Manjushri was telling him, no, sorry, I got mixed up. Yeah, forget about the Manjushri. Rinpoche didn't say that at all. So being able to, being able to, within that understanding of emptiness, being able to posit the conventional things without seeing any kind of a contradiction, that's what's difficult. So the appearance side is what's the most difficult point in this kind of whole system of the Prasangikas. The side of emptiness is not the most difficult thing. Simply negating existence from its own side, that's fairly straightforward. And then, having that kind of like a vague kind of a appearance of things as a result of that meditation, that's not so difficult. What's really difficult is being able to see how, while things don't exist from their own side, everything is completely empty. Nevertheless, without any kind of sense of contradiction, being able to see that things do exist conventionally. That's the difficult thing.
Telea ine tanda di jermuche lamrim hangdong chemyogi parkap tsikje di enkyangol gyawe shindugu yang lungde nangi yubas kyugi longor rangshin mebala gyunre tendri jogwa kamyo kyangs. Tenda ume tenla yinoshi teke mawe tsula tena zes ta bet uzu gyagares longo rangshin meba te ki yundu gyunre tendri joya di kakshu kabe shula ani gyunre tendri ki joya ki ne te ta kala kaksa chires kyugi longo rangshin meba la gyunre tendri jogwa kamyo kyangs ta kabo yonaya 다 우메 된생인데 타니를 미네가 우메 된생인데 다 들다스 땡중 주전도 전에 동바 주전 전 땡중 는 샤르고야지 레 딘 되게 말에 출 때는 제스
tel uzu kya kores.
Delia uzu ta pet lote cholia nende chinta drogores.
Okay.
The Tije that Silugi Kevarema, the Tandetanare,
No.
Kasayandi, said that Chivichare.
No. And then what Rinpoche says in anyway, yeah, so anyway, I don't know how you say that in English, but anyway, there's a particular section in the insight section of the Great Expedition of the Stages of the Path by Rinpoche Lama Tsongkhapa, where he it's his sort of like his observation or his advice is that what we really need to put the main emphasis on, which is the most difficult point, is the things being able to posit things as being empty, totally empty of existing from their own side, and yet still being able to exist conventionally. In other words, what we really need to put our emphasis on is the understanding that actually the being dependent arising, for us, dependent arising should be something that supports the things being empty. Being empty supports being a dependent arising.
Page lung the Taran Rumen Rosangi Umajuba, Dawata Umanjubetsi. Munam Tata Ngobo Meba, Dosu Shubane, Nubachelas. Munam Santa Chujing Ngobo, Ngobo Mebasna, Tentama Matuba, Ranguna Matuba. Munam Tata Ngobo Meba, Dosu Shubane, Nubachelas, the Tindakalachimares, Nubachela. Tada Rangshin Shandalas, that they might be Rangshin. Rangshin Shan the Carson, Tenta Rangshin the Maimba, Kunzo Naya Rangshin, that Sangan Tang, Chajeg Namsha, Jingurwa, or Tanyegi, wrong Chajeg Ganga Jingurwa. That Rangshin Shandala, Kong to Chuba, Delatun in the Mainos. That Rangshin Shanda Karishasana, Kunzo Gi, Tanyegi, that Chajeg Namsha Tisha, Rangshin Shanda go Tisha, or Ti and Gajakabe, Rangon to Kabe, Jelia, Tilia never dreamed, Lelo Maritas, Kong to Chuba, Delatun and Nova Mainos. Or the Tasungi or Dasungi. That Jeshenda Yoti Chorua, Kandar, Gajak Kakshu to Jundela Sobe, and Nawatelia, and Debuche, Jotuyati, Lelo Mariswatch.
And then there is a verse in Chandakirti, the Madhyamakavatara, which I think it comes to the same point, although I'm sure it could be explained. I mean, maybe I should say, perhaps it can be explained otherwise, but I think where he says, he talks about conventional phenomena on the one hand, and then things, so conventional phenomena, then non-thing means their non-existence from their own side. So of those two, the understanding how things don't exist from their own side, that's not so difficult. What's difficult is when it comes to the conventional natures, so things which exist conventionally, such as good and bad, karma and its results, to be able to, again, to be able to posit them comfortably. In other words, to be able to see how all of that is quite completely consistent with being empty of existing from its own side. In other words, to be able to understand how they don't exist from their own side, and yet there's no contradiction that they do exist conventionally. No.
Ota tindijre, that tella page dishuna yabumendo. Tati pejer jermuchik tindi sungdigiya insarvas. Tat chi sangang ningma inare, sajja inare, tuzo tindi kande inas. Tete pejer ya jermuchik korangi miksegi taduchi. Pejer dokumento chebe ina, sangang ningmegi kebachimbo, rongsom pendita singinji yoyimbare. Rongsom. Ta sangang ningmagi ta kebachire. Rongsom pendita.
Rongsom.
The Koran Kansatiki Chenre, that Ronson Binditagi, Karisungu Yarisana, Kenam Yavar Neshindu, Dribunawa, Mingurushe, Kandu Yakoa Matabes, or the Kenam Yavar Neshi, Gugen Natsola, Tene, Dribusange Natsos, Jungde, Yuba Yinza, and Kundepsne. Kundep chetati yomaris. Jia mebe kundepti yomar. Karasana ngegi and ken sangela dene dribu sangen naso jungati ngen dures. Di inza and tanya to mebe kundeting yomaris. Dilla kurve nematons. Ta gunde tendi tenjin ritsuti ti and nawacham ming tanya gongi. Mato ene yunde ngobo dulu jungene ene tentambe ngene ene yebeji ngandugumes yunde tenjin jesu tu nawa samle mato ba yunde ngobo midubes ta yunde ngobo midubes de tentambar rangone midube dela dondo ne matons takte dondo ti ngala yomars de rangone tube tongba de shindu 텔레야 균제 상에게 남자 담제 조토의 인자 딱체기 타니갈래 잡아래 로구기 타니갈래 잡아래스 제제 어떤 데 숨도 와
Now you might think, well, that's what we would say in the Gelug tradition, Jeremshe, Lama Tsongkhapa's own Gelug tradition, but what about the other traditions? What about, for example, the Nyingmapas? Do they have the same idea or what? And so to answer that, there is one great Nyingmapa master, the Rongsom Pandita. So what he says is, I assert that because there is a variety of cause and conditions, therefore there are a variety of results, good and bad and so forth. Therefore, in ordinary English, I think we say I'm not guilty of, so I don't have the mistake of denial. In other words, what do you call it, the nihilism. I don't have that nihilistic extreme. I don't hold that nihilistic extreme. And then because I say that causes and conditions exist conventionally, but I don't say they exist ultimately. I say they exist conventionally, but I don't say they exist ultimately. Therefore, I also don't have the fault of the eternalist extreme, the extreme of superimposition.
No. And Karju Cholia, Jizumilarebe Sunguduas, Tondam Dembe Wandune, Gigle Sanje Nigame, and Dujasata Lamdames. Tentamba Rangone, Gig singing there, Nigamarella, Sanje singing there, Nigamare, Sanje Tobjegi, and Lambda, Sada, Tuzoyan, Tentamba Wandune, Nigamares, Gigle Sanje Nigames, Dujasata Lamdames. That dinama shesore. Kunzo dembe wandune tamje yueje tuesums. Kunzo tanya tamdune tamje yueje sanje sumores. Kate kunzo tanya de mebe inas, ema semje megunas, tusum sanje chile chungs. And semje mena sanje kandes cheje. But the Hindu semje tanya de yogo duas. Sanjeji paya duas, Sanjaya duas, Tanya Zamdu, Sanging Nazo, Debuchan Jogo duas, those chene kaju choli ita jizumele tende sungor ta yin gurwa karasana tuche metibata penjen narubata tuzur tukne sungu yorwa ta metibata naruba tuzo sama in dirubata karsa ben nalendagi ta tanjuwa tawa shingi rede yorwa.
Then in the Kagyu tradition, we have the teachings of Milarepa, who says that ultimately there are no Buddhas, ultimately there are no hindrances, because you can't find them when you look for them in their base of imputation. Likewise, the grounds and paths that lead up to Buddhahood, these are also don't exist ultimately, they can't be found. Then in terms of the conventional truths, all of those exist. So everything exists conventionally, nothing exists ultimately, but they do exist conventionally. And he said that if they didn't even exist conventionally, then we would have to say there's no sentient beings. And if there's no sentient beings, then how could there be Buddhas? So there has to be somebody, a sentient being that becomes a Buddha. So that's Milarepa's view, and this is really quite reliable because his view, his understanding, is derived from Maichipa and Naropa, who are great masters of Nalanda and proponents of the Prasangika view.
That ne Dongzhou Tolya Gejishena. That tangi Nanjo Sungzi Nacho di Ame Zumba, Giji Pungur de Ame Zunzik che. That the order Lume Amai Koilusos, or that the Dongzhou Nyon Dongsu di Imbarata, Tagi the Nancho che. That Lume Amai Koilusos, Sayatigi, 20 candidates, Dongba Ni. 된 랑원의 주변 동배 동수대 아니 지다와 신도 마란츠 아니 마시베 왕기 아니 나란도 거를 캬바 인자 아니 아마디 당보 거란에 뭐지 만나베 인자 아니 나줄리 베서치레 루메 아마이 코일루소 나 거를 캬메야기 내단디 아니 아멘네즈 다 랑원의 주변 동배네즈디 마시베 왕기 and quality cameras.
Those lines are about the side of appearances, where it says, this diverse subject-object world is my mother's gentle smile, this cycle of birth and death, her deceptive words. Then the first line of verse 4, where it says, my undeceiving mother, you have betrayed me. Yes, almost like my undeceiving mother, you have deceived me. It's the same word, really. So anyway, that's okay. So this is about the empty side, and what it means is that actually everything is empty. Everything is empty, existing from its own side. But because we haven't understood that, we have continued to wander in psychic existence. So we wander in psychic existence because of not having recognized the mother. In other words, because of not having understood the mother emptiness. So it's in a sense that because we didn't recognize her, she deceived us. So, or to use the words that the translators used here, she's betrayed us. No.
Mm-hmm. Tawana tindegi lubatele trotuyagi kapkari orsna jojo tenjunti gyobareus o ta tenju juchala tene ane rangon trube tongbodi nye yongbe o tigi ta tenjun tigi tabla tene rangon trube tongbodi nyene ta rangon trube tongbodi nyebe en lot kombe du chene ane tar lenyen이 but samalo and pa pangbe tichigi indo koal toba tichigi inza and job tourists that jojo tenjung ti jobaros.
And then the question to the question, so how can I be freed from this betrayal, this deception? What's the method? And that is answered in the next line where it says, while I hope to be saved by my brother dependent arising, my older brother dependent arising. So what that means is the method to be free of all of that is meditating on dependent arising. So dependent arising is the method. And so through understanding dependent arising, one can understand emptiness, and then through developing that understanding of emptiness more and more, then eventually you would become completely free of karma and the mental afflictions, and finally, achieve, in other words, achieve liberation.
Daya jojo tenjung di jobar reos number chigduna ama game connecting in drawer retesne ko sik didan reba ina jojo tenjung di jobar reos sayati yang ko des tonda kagadwa kaza chanju semdegi sik di midadunga tongashe chawa sumbe semjungche chodu semne jongcheba chunyi rashi meba yins ene midabada dunga wala soba tuzugi ene yuma mimbade mimba che ene ti jesu ene tongbanigi tende tembegane ene trowa chigres ti inda jojo tenjungsi gyunde tenjungla soba tuzugi midabada dunga wala soba tuzugi ne tuzo ngeliya ene lamden nambe kati gyule kebe tone da gyumimba cheche ti inda jojo tenjungi gyobaros dichane jojo tenjungi lamsa tongbanyi togres dilten togres kejama imche jojo tenjung sayadra ane ji gyulen ribu jungsuda ane ji dungawa da midabala soba tuzugi ne tuzo shebe tone gyumimba mimba che dene rangone trube tongba tigi ane namba chigduna ama gemo connecting in the Torahs ne but tartune call toya de and rangon to tomba neba korange in trotwood was the inza mitadunge tongashe chawasumbe sem jongche chod sem ne jongche ba chunirashi meba yins but didang kondo jibaji ruye sushtu.
No. Actually, when you look at this, because it says, I hope to be saved by my brother dependent arising. Actually, this is really quite similar, I think, to the words we looked at from the Bodhicitta Varana, the Bodhicitta commentary by Nagarjuna that I mentioned, quoted from the other night. So remember there it says that impermanence and suffering, that teaching is aimed at bringing the mind, which is at present immature, to a state of maturity. And then what actually liberates one, so you reach maturity, then after that, then there's liberation. So what actually liberates you is emptiness, meditating on emptiness. So from that point of view, there's a difference between what dependent arising does and what emptiness does. Because if you think about it in this way, you can think about it in this way, that because emptiness is not something that you can immediately understand, so dependent arising on the level of causes and conditions, that's something that protects you in the meantime, because that would refer to understanding karma and its results and so forth. So then furthermore, then through depending upon dependent arising, you come to realize emptiness, and that's what, as it said in the Bodhicitta commentary, that's what supremely
Chodu semne jongcheba
So yeah. So what supremely purifies the mind? That was the term that was used in that text. So they purify the mind, but what supremely purifies the mind is the meditation on emptiness. So no, George.
Tati yan namgyu umashijaba lungji. Tongo jawa ishinu yang lungji nangi ba ti tata kuju drabudu was. Sonam memba tangbodo. Pardo daane dobache. Tama tashi kundo ba teju tene keba yins. O tomar sonam mayimbe jita megawage ji kunlunda jebale jibu dungen jungagi o tele ene dobarche o ji lendeg landola so o tizo midabata dunga la so tatzo president rurbata o sonam member tambodos
midabata dunga
o tuzo page rure o tichi mida le dungele ne dame sungsne namle nar tene sungore bande choda o tambo midabata dunga we tamji ene 자와다 저번 진질로 너버 지르보다 뭐 뒤지 손남 멤버 당보도 바르도 다는 너버 체스 다 되네 바르도 다음에 되는 잠배 되는 템배 터네 아니 거치원래 좋아지야 타마다시 군도 봤는데 리베남랑 타예베 고네 시주기 년부체베 아니 제투야기 아니 양답에 다와 디토네 탑기 넘어 군던데베 남그 촌내 그 동이 어 두치네야 좋아지그레스 어디 대단 라와지기 오 단데 조조 땡준티 껴버 레오 넘버 찍도네 아마게모 커넥팅기네 좋아레오 쓰는데 조조 땡준 탐부 껴야 돼 손남 멤버 탐부 도서야 어 두절이야 군주체 찍도
Yes, so actually from the previously what Rinpoche was saying, so in that way you see that even though the elder brother dependent arising protects, but what ultimately frees you is only the mother emptiness, the old mother emptiness. So then this is also similar to the verse from the R.A. Davis 400 verses, which is Holiness repeatedly quotes. So this is the verse that says, firstly, what you do is you put a stop to that the demeritorious, that which is not meritorious. In other words, what that means is you put a stop to the karma, demeritorious karma that results in suffering. And actually in here you can include the reflection on impermanence and suffering, because just like the Dhammakirti says in the Brahmanavartika, therefore because of it being impermanent, therefore suffering. So there's that that term there. So in other words, what this first line is talking about is how you bring an end to those kind of actions, the kind of conduct that brings suffering. Then Aryadeva goes on to say with the second line, then in the middle, then what you do is, then you stop the self. What he says is you stop the self. I mean, that's probably not a literal translation of that verse, but anyway, more or less that's what it says in that second line. You stop this stealth, bring a stop to the self. What that means is, through realizing selflessness, then you break free of what binds you to cyclic existence. And then he goes on to say in the third line, then at the end you overcome all views. It says something like that. So what that means is that you meditate on selflessness, emptiness in such a way, by depending upon many different lines of reasoning, you need to realize emptiness in order to be able to overcome not just the afflictive obscurations, but even the knowledge obscurations. So all the obscurations, and through that, by abandoning all the obscurations, achieving enlightenment. And that's really only made possible by the kindness of the mother, the old mother. No.
Oh. Oh.
Now there's only 1 or 2 minutes left, so maybe we'll stop there.
And
No. And tomorrow we're going to be meeting at 6:30. Yes. What? That's what I thought. I was thinking something like that. So you've looked, and it says His Holiness' teaching is from 6:30 tomorrow night to 7:30. But anyway, 6:30 to 7:30. Never mind about India. 6:30 to 7:30.
Actually,
No. The main thing is it's 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Yeah, I the page 남균 딘데 나보 계기민도 주주투탄 제가 봐도 데 남균 딘데 사기 말해. So I think that's. So what should we do then? What should we do? So you're saying that it would be 6:30 to 7:30. So then what could we do in order not to miss that teaching? So maybe we should start earlier than usual then. How about that? So that would be So should we do 4:30 to 6:30? Maybe maybe finish a few minutes early. Maybe no. No, so we'll do 4:30. We'll meet at 4:30 tomorrow then. Okay.
Oh yeah.
No. I had a feeling, but so I'm glad you looked that up actually, because I had a feeling it couldn't be. So that's really good. Thank you so much for helping us to get that cleared. Otherwise, we'd have been in a bit of a mess, I think. Okay. So the dedication prayers, please. You got new omze? Sajib Gejo me Dodran Rirabli ni Degembadi Sangejin do me Debu Dogun Namda Shingla Cheba Jo Etam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamni Dayami. Though he's the father, producer of all conquerors, as a conqueror's son, he produced the thought of upholding the conqueror's dharma in infinite worlds. Through this truth, may the conqueror Lord Sang's teachings flourish. When of yore, in the presence of Buddha Indraketu, he made his vow, the conqueror and his offspring praised his powerful courage. Through this truth, may the conqueror Lord Sang's teachings flourish. That the lineage of pure view and conduct might spread, he offered a white crystal rosary to the sage, who gave him a conch and prophesied. Through this truth, may the conqueror Lord Sang's teachings flourish. His pure view, free of eternity or destruction, his pure meditation, cleansed of dark, fading, and fog, his pure conduct, practiced according to conqueror's orders, may the conqueror Lord Sang's teachings flourish. Learned since he extensively sought out learning, reverend, rightly applying it to himself, good, dedicating all beings. May the conqueror Lord Sang's teachings flourish. Through being sure that all scriptures, definitive and interpretive, were without contradiction, advice for one person's practice, he stopped all misconduct. May the conqueror Lord Sang's teachings flourish. Listening to explanations of the three Pitakas, realized teachings, practice of the three trainings, his skill and is amazing. May the conqueror Lord Sang's teachings flourish. Outwardly calmed and subdued by this hearer's conduct, inwardly trusting in the two stages practice, he allied without clash the good paths of Sutra and Tantra. May the conqueror Lord Sang's teachings flourish. Combining voidness explained as the causal vehicle with great bliss, achieved by method, the effect vehicle, heart essence of 8,000 Dharma bundles. May the conqueror Lord Sang's teachings flourish. by the power of the ocean of oath-bound doctrine protectors like the main guardians of the tree being's path, the quick-acting Lord Vaishravana Kamayama, may the conqueror Lord Sang's teachings flourish. In short, by the lasting of glorious Guru's lives, by the earth being full of good, learned, reverent holders of the teaching, by the increase of power, his patrons, may the conqueror Lord Sang's teachings flourish. Janjo Zamjo Rinpoche Magye Panan Gigud Yaba Nyamba Meba Ye Kone Kondo Yaba Jo Akare Rawe Korwe Shingam De Pendan Dewa Malu Chungwe Chenre Ziwan Tenzin Gyazo Yi Shabe Site Bat Tengyo Chie Tuzu Janjin Jangun Gyawe Tenzin Yang Bewe Kunzu Tobo Chosun Kuwe Lemon Tutru Patazo Tuje Kun Captain Shaw Sange Tamba Dawa Tenzin Kipu Shabe Tentro Kundegi Chungwa Neka Tatu Tendru Shu Chamba Pao Chita Kemba Dan Kundu Zambo Dean Deda Gungi Jesu Daloji Kewa Deda Tamche Rabdu Ngoa Tuzun Shepe Kewa Tamche Ki Ngoa Kanla Chotunga Tagi Gewe Zawa Digungam Zobo Chochi Rab Ngoa Ge Jogi Gabo Zonga Be Jesu Namba Pawala Gegi Sema Shewa Nantunge Sanwa Sho Dadan Shingi Tuzun Dantewe Sonye Latene Gawa Lozan Trabai Tempa Yu Agyoruchi, Mimesebe Teshin Chiniziti, making Bebo Jam. Sanjin Gibe Zuyan Zonga.